Cynthia. Thank you. This meeting is called to order at 5 p.m.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the December 15, 2021 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. I'm going to go over a few reminders before we begin. Members of the public were asked to submit requests to speak on any item on the agenda, including their name, phone number, and item for which they wish to make a public comment to Cynthia_Shaw at ci.richmond.ca.us by 3 p.m. today, as described on the first page of the agenda. If you wish to make a comment on any item on the agenda and have not emailed me your request, you must do so in accordance with the first page of the agenda before the item is called. Requests received via email during the meeting and after the deadline to submit comments will be accommodated as is reasonably possible and will be limited to a maximum of 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the number of commenters as fully described in the Rent Board meeting agenda procedures. This meeting is being conducted as a Zoom webinar. Members of the public are considered attendees and will be muted for the duration of the meeting unless called upon during public comment and unmuted by the webinar host. The city cannot guarantee that its network and/or the site will be uninterrupted. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all statements made during this meeting will be on the public record. The first item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please join me in Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an honorable roll call from board members and staff? Board Member Connor.
Present.
Board Member Johnson.
Present.
Board Member Vaisilas.
Present.
Vice Chair Mishek.
Present.
Chair Finley.
Present.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Present.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Present.
And Staff Attorney Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, our board members and staff is present. The next item on the agenda is Statement of Conflict of Interest. Are there any? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Any changes from staff to the agenda?
1 second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. There is one small typo in the minutes. Instead of the word being passed through, instead of PASS, it's PAST. So that's one minor non-substantive typo that we will be correcting for the next, for the future going forward.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda by board members?
I had a small typo as well in the public comment section of the minutes. The word respectively should be respectfully.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Ms. Connor. Anything further?
No, thank you, Board Member Finley. I'm sorry,
you.
Chair Finley.
Board members, fine. Thank you. Now, may I have a motion, please, to accept the agenda review, please, items?
Do we have? Is this a substantial?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm not
I jumped
sure.
around.
Well, let's check. Charles, do we have to take a vote for these clerical errors or?
No.
No. Okay. So there's no vote. There's no vote. No vote. Chair.
Okay.
It's because it's just clerical errors. They're not substantive changes.
Fine.
Okay. Okay. The next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have one speaker. Hold on a second, let me get my stuff together, sorry. Tonight, we have one speaker. The speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes to address the board. When your name is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. For the record, please state your name and your residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. You will be muted when your time expires. The public speaker is Cordell Hindler. Let me let him in. Okay, Cordell, you are.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So good evening, Chair Finley, board members, and staff. My name is Cordell Henley. I'm a Richmond resident, and I do have some invitations for you all. So you are cordially invited to attend the Richmond Rotary Club weekly meeting this Friday at the Richmond Country Club at 12:30, and the tickets are only $25 for lunch. That's one. And then number two is our speaker for that meeting will be Angel Montoya, our new fire chief, and he will be talking to us about his vision for the fire department overall. So that's one. And then the other item I wanted to talk to you all about was the consent calendar regarding the AB 361 regarding the keeping the meetings, virtual. I'm thinking that it is a good idea at first, but I'm thinking a hybrid model would do the trick. So because, for example, the city of Berkeley had a city council meeting last Tuesday, and they did a hybrid model. So I thought it sounded pretty good at first. And so I'm thinking that the board should think about, going back to in person, because I miss seeing the board in the council chambers, and hopefully at some point we will be all together again real soon. And that's it.
That was the only speaker. The next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar.
Do we have any items that either the staff or the board wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Staff?
No,
Board members? All right, in that case, may I have a motion, please?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
May I have a second?
I second the motion.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. May we have a vote, please?
Oh, that was Vice Chair.
For Vice Chair Mishik.
Pardon me?
The second was Vice Chair Mishik.
Oh, my apologies. All right. That's the second then.
Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Connor?
Yes.
Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Board Member Vasilas?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mishik?
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion to approve the consent calendar passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is item G1 under consideration of appeals. Item G1 is the appellant appeals the hearing examiner's decision on remand that found the respondents who owed excess rent damages due to both an improper retention of security deposit and impressible utility charges. Additionally, appellant appeals the finding the respondents were entitled to relocation payments. Specifically, appellant asserts that one, respondents in the lower unit were unauthorized occupants and no relationship to the appellant, and consequently, their petition is illegitimate. Two, any claims to the rent overcharges based on utility payments and defeated based on upper unit respondents' written agreement to pay all the utility bills. Three, lower unit respondents are not entitled to relocation payments as they were unauthorized occupants. Four, the security deposit is not refundable as respondents caused more damage than the security deposits were otherwise covered. 5, and the hearing examiner was biased and deprived the landlord of due process. Attachment D. I'm assuming that you guys received attachment D. There are no public comments on this item.
Thank you. This is a landlord appeal to a hearing examiner's decision. For the record, will you please identify yourselves? State your name and your position in this case, and we will start with the appellant.
Mr. Sharma?
Yeah, my name is Naresh Sharma.
Thank you. And what is your position in the case, Mr. Sharma?
Okay, my son's going to speak. I'm the landlord.
Okay. And according to our records, you are the appellant in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, may we also hear from the respondents? Would you be good enough to state your name and your position in this case?
Nichelle, you may go first.
Yeah, my name is Nishchal Rajbandari.
And Rashawn, you may go second.
Okay, my name is Roshan Casey. I'm a renter for lower unit.
All righty. And you are both respondents in this case.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
All righty. Thank you. Before we begin, let's go over a few appeal hearing procedures. First, the legal staff will give a summary of the case. Next, each party or their representative will have 7 minutes to address the board. The appellant will start first and will have 5 minutes to present their case. Next, the respondents will collectively be given 7 minutes to present their rebuttal. Finally, the appellant will be given an additional 2 minutes to close. The board has the discretion to allow more time. Please note that when the appellant or respondent is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. You will be muted when your time expires. Now, as a reminder, this is not a de novo hearing. Therefore, no new evidence can be submitted. Anything that is said tonight should be based on the issues raised on appeal and exclusively on the record that was before the hearing examiner. Parties may discuss or comment upon legal matters in question and any other pertinent issues raised by the appeal. The board must disregard any discussion or comments regarding factual matters that were not in the record before the hearing examiner or officially noticed in the hearing documents. After all of the parties have spoken, the board will make a decision, will have a discussion and then make a decision. May we now hear from Mr. Oshinuga, our attorney. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Finley. Good evening, board members. This matter, it may seem a little complicated. I don't think it's that bad once you get through the facts. Mrs. Shaw summarized the issues pretty well in terms of what was appealed, so I'm not going to go over that. What I will leave you all with is the importance of understanding what a tenant is and how a tenancy is formed. I believe my recommendation lays that out. I encourage you all to ask any questions if you have any, either now or during or even after the hearing. But just to give you a broad stroke of what happened in this case, there's the landlord. He owns what's a duplex, essentially. It's definitely a duplex. It has 2 separate dwelling units. The landlord had gone back and forth with city officials separate from this case, arguing that in fact his property is a single family home. City officials disagreed. It's been listed as a duplex on the county. He even submitted an administrative determination to our program, the City of Richmond, and our executive director, also consistent with the city's prior decisions, ruled that there was 2 separate dwelling units. The lease agreement that I attached to my recommendation, you can see that the lease agreement identifies 2 separate dwelling units. They both have separate kitchens and separate cooking facilities. They both have separate keys, and the occupants are given a separate set of keys. And in this matter, the landlord had rented under one lease possession to 2 separate rental units, and one family lived in the upper unit, the other family lived in the bottom unit. All right. And after some time, the family in the upper unit moved out, and the family in the bottom unit moved into the upper unit, right? And that family is the Nichelle and Monica family. They later moved into the upper unit. All right. After some time had passed, they testified that with the landlord's permission, they offered the bottom unit for rent, and that's when they found the second lower unit occupant, who was Roshan, and that he had been renting there since. There's some argument in terms of whether or not the landlord actually gave them permission. At one point during the hearing, the landlord testified that he told them that they can look for tenants to rent to bottom, but he never gave them permission to allow a tenant to move in. Despite that, and as you saw in my recommendation, despite that, he learned of the lower unit tenant Roshan's presence, and he requested an application from both Roshan and his wife, which they submitted. They paid a separate application fee for that. And the landlord then followed up soon after. The landlord went to the rent program and sought a rent increase due to the increase of tenants and occupants. And he listed Roshan as a current tenant and his wife. And so obviously he knew of their presence. Subsequently, after withdrawing that petition, he engaged in numerous correspondence with Roshan, asking, letting Roshan know that he'll come to his home and replace his heater. And the list goes on, right? And after some time, for whatever reason, the landlord then did a 180 and denied ever knowing Roshan. He called the police on Roshan and had the police try to eject him as a trespasser. He served a notice of owner move-in on the upper unit, but in the notice of owner move-in, he wrote upper and lower unit, and he sought to remove all tenants from the entire premise. After the upper unit tenants moved out, they were paid half. The upper unit tenants were paid half of the relocation payments, and they moved out. Now they were due the other half of the relocation payments, but the landlord failed to meet that obligation. And so put that to one bucket. The lower tenant units filed a petition for relocation, asserting that, hey, we're entitled to relocation as well because you did an owner move-in on this entire building and it has 2 units. Landlord said, I don't know who you are. You're a trespasser. Don't know who you are. So I'm not going to make those I'm not going to make those payments to you. And eventually, after a lot of what the tenant Roshan testified to as harassment, and you can take that as you will, after much of those activities, tenant Roshan ended up vacating the premise with the 5-day notice to quit, and with threats of police engagement. The tenants in the bottom unit, Roshan filed a relocation petition and a excess rent petition based on utility charges that should not have happened because the units were not separately metered. The upstairs, but Roshan did not file a petition for security deposit, for failure to return security deposit. The upstairs tenants filed a relocation petition for the second half of the relocation payments. They filed an excess rent petition for utility charges because the units were not separately metered. And they filed a security deposit petition. The landlord filed objections to all these petitions. I'm not going to get into those. You have that in the recommendation. After the first hearing occurred, the hearing examiner essentially found on all issues in favor of the tenants. He found that the landlord owed them excess rent due to the utilities being charged when there's no separately, when the meters were not separate. He found that the landlord owed relocation, the remaining half of the upstairs unit, and a full relocation payment to the downstairs unit. And he found that the landlord owed a part, I think it was around $400 in security deposit, so a partial return of the security deposit. The landlord appealed that. Now that was last year. I don't remember which month. You have to look at the recommendation. He appealed that, and it went before this rent board in February of this year. Some of you were not on the rent board at that time. And at that time, the landlord failed to appeal the hearing examiner's decision as it related to the upstairs unit's award of the second half of relocation. All right. And because the landlord failed to mention that in his appeal, that was not in front of this board, and the board deemed it to be final, meaning that the landlord had to pay that. It's whatever the hearing examiner awarded on that basis had to be paid. So that's gone. The rest of the issues, the board, after I wrote a recommendation, the board decided there weren't enough facts before the board to render a decision. And central to the board's decision was the idea that the hearing examiner did not make a specific finding on whether or not Roshan in the bottom unit was a tenant, because he was not listed on the lease, the original lease. There were other issues that needed to be addressed, but I think that one was a very central issue. So after remanding it, which means sending it back, after the board sent it back to the hearing examiner to make 8 distinctive findings and make a ruling on each, the hearing examiner did that on the record. And he essentially affirmed his prior decisions, just with more factual findings. He ruled that Roshan was a tenant based on the fact that the landlord had knowledge of his presence, consented to his presence by not objecting, and that under the rent ordinance, you can have a tenancy by implication based on conduct. And because Roshan is a tenant, Roshan was therefore entitled to any excess rent damage that may have occurred based on the utility charges. He also found that the units were not separately metered, which the ordinance requires that if a landlord is going to charge the utilities, they must be separately metered. And it's undisputed in this case that there's no separate meter for each unit. He found that Roshan was also entitled to relocation payments because the landlord took an action that took an action of owner move-in that resulted in the tenant vacating. And finally, he found that both Roshan and Nichelle were entitled to the security deposit. This is long, I'm sorry. I actually didn't mean it to be this long. So let me just wrap up. On appeal, the landlord appeals is essentially the same issue. He appeals all the findings. He also appeals the fact that Nichelle is entitled to the second half of that payment. And I think that's probably important for you all to realize that that part of his appeal must fail as a matter of law. And it's because he didn't raise it in his first appeal. You cannot revive it. It's gone, it's extinguished. That obligation must be met. That's what the board said in its prior recommendation, and that's what it is. So he has to pay Nichelle the last half of his payments. As to the rest of them, those are all timely appeals, as to the rest of the issues. I will just leave you with this on my recommendation. As you all saw, the security deposit issue as it relates to Roshan, I recommended that you reverse because Roshan never petitioned. And if you don't petition, you can't get it. I mean, it's a pretty fundamental rule that the board has always stuck by. And it's consistent with due process. You have to actually raise the claim to be entitled to any damages under the claim. He didn't raise it. As to Nichelle and his security deposit, my recommendation was to reverse the hearing examiner's award on the security deposit issue to Nichelle because of the record did not contain substantial evidence. The only evidence that I saw in the record of photographs of the unit of how it was left was photographs of the lower unit and not the upper unit, photographs submitted by Roshan and not Nichelle. And so I didn't see any evidence that Nichelle submitted of the condition of his unit, what condition they left it in when they vacated, and what condition they inherited the unit in. It's not the landlord's burden to prove what condition the unit was given to the tenant. It's the tenant's burden to prove that because it's their claim, right? And I didn't see that the tenant met, there was no evidence, in my opinion, to warrant that award. So my recommendation was to reverse. As to the relocation obligations, I'm not going to get into the details, but feel free to ask me questions around that. And I think the utility issues is fairly straightforward. The landlord admits, I mean, it's uncontested that the utilities are not separately metered. He just thinks that the Roshan is not entitled to any damages because Roshan is not his tenant. And so I think the central issue of this matter is going to be tenant. And if you agree with my recommendation that Roshan is a tenant, then the rest of the recommendation is going to be consistent, right? But if you find that Roshan is not a tenant, I think that's going to change the entire recommendation, because if Roshan is not a tenant, then obviously he's not entitled to any relocation payments. He's not entitled to any security deposit return, which would be consistent with the recommendation. And he's not entitled to any excess rent damages. due to the utilities not being separately metered. And if he's not a tenant, it's even an interesting question as to whether or not Nichelle would be entitled to excess rent based on utilities not being separately metered. But sorry for the very, very long explanation. I didn't mean to do that. But if you have any questions, I know it's really complicated. I thought second go around, it's probably important for me to kind of paint the picture of the entire procedure so you all can have a better understanding of it. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me at any time.
Thank you, Mr. Oceanuga. Do we have any questions for Mr. Oceanuga by the board members? Okay.
Chair Finley, I do have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Oceanuga, I'm a little confused by the instruction you just gave. It was my understanding that the hearing officer has already made a determination that based on the facts presented to him at the hearing that Mr. Rashawn is a tenant and this is two separate units. Is that not correct?
That is correct. I'm sorry. Did I say something that was consistent with that?
Well, I thought that you said that if we found that Mr. Rashawn was not a tenant, but I thought that that was an underlying fact, and that would require us to do a de novo review.
Oh, thank you, Board Member Connor. Thank you for that explanation. Yes, you're absolutely right. The facts you have to accept the facts as the hearing examiner has found the facts, and Board Member Connor is absolutely right. The only time you don't have to do that is if the facts if that finding of fact is clearly unreasonable, right? Or if there is nothing in the record that would point to that it just, if the hearing examiner found something that was just out of left field, you obviously don't have to accept that. But Board Member Connor is absolutely right. You take the fact, you are not the trier of fact. This is not a new hearing. You take all the facts that he's found, and you just decide that the hearing examiner has found, and you just decide whether or not there's substantial evidence to support either the finding or the conclusion that he draws from the findings. So I'm sorry if I said something that gave you the impression otherwise, but again, just for the third time's a charm, you take the facts as they are, and you evaluate them using the substantial evidence standard. That is, does the record contain substantial evidence to support these conclusions or findings? Thank you, Board Member Connor.
Board Member Connor, then are you of the mind that this is definitely not a de novo hearing and that we accept the fact of the tenancy of Mr. Rashawn?
Based on Mr. Oceanuga's instructions, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But Board Member Vasilas and Board Member Johnson both have their hands up. I don't want to monopolize the time.
Who was first with the hands? Mr. Vasilas or I'm not seeing.
I am sorry, I couldn't tell.
Or Board Member.
Mrs. Johnson can go first. Board Member Johnson.
All right, Ms. Johnson.
Okay. So, Mr. Oceanuga, I just have a question. It's the security deposit that you disagree with the ruling on?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, Board Member Johnson.
You said, was it the security deposit, the second half?
My recommendation in terms of what I'm assuming you're asking what part of the hearing examiner's decision am I affirming or am I recommending that it be affirmed, and what part am I recommending?
What part did you disagree with?
So the part where I'm recommending that the hearing examiner be reversed would be on the security findings for both Rashawn and Nichelle. The hearing examiner ruled that they are both entitled to a partial return of their security deposit for various reasons. And in my recommendation, I spell out why that was not supported by substantial evidence in the record and recommending that it be reversed.
If I may, Mr. Oceanuga, are you referring then to item number 4 of your recommendations?
Let me just scroll down. Yes.
Okay, so everyone's on the same page. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Johnson?
Sorry, recommend 3 and 4, correct?
Thank you. Yes, item number 3 and item number 4. The recommendation, the hearing examiners, because there's two tenancies, the security deposits have to be handled separately, right? And so that's why the recommendation just splits up the two security deposits. And the number 3, my recommendation is to reverse the portion that awards the portion of the hearing examiner's decision that awards Roshan a partial return of his security deposit. And then number 4 is to reverse Nichelle's award.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, did you have any follow-up on that?
No, my question's answered.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vasilas.
Yeah, so if we are to assume that there are two tendencies going on here, I understand the utilities portion. The thing that I'm concerned with is the payout for the owner move-in. I don't see how we can award a payout on an owner move-in on 2 separate units, because I'm pretty sure it's just on 1 unit per building or just 1 unit in general. So I was a little unclear on that.
Yeah, great. I think that's a great question. And so what I'm going to say is, let me give you just a general outline of the law, and then you all can have a discussion, because I think that's a great question. And all you board members, after hearing the arguments from both parties, can have a discussion as to whether or not it makes sense, right? Because that I think what you're getting at is a question. It might be a question of law, and you might have a little bit more wiggle room as to how you're seeing that piece of law be interpreted, rather than a factual question that's already been determined, like whether or not someone's a tenant, right? You don't really have much wiggle room with that. So to give you just paint you a broad picture, and then we can get into the arguments. I'm reading from the Relocation Ordinance, and it's in the recommendation as well, the language, but it says that a permanent relocation shall be provided pursuant to the requirements of this chapter by any landlord who takes action to terminate tenancy for the reasons specified and then they quote the owner moving statute and the withdrawal statute, right? And when you read the recommendation, you'll see that I've spelled out an analysis that's consistent with law and legal research, that when you read the provision that I just read, it doesn't limit the actions to any legal action, right? It applies it very broadly. So again, a permanent relocation shall be provided pursuant to the requirements of the Relocation Ordinance by any landlord who takes action to terminate a tenancy. It doesn't say who takes certain specific actions or certain illegal actions or certain legal actions. Takes any action or actions to terminate a tenancy specified in the owner move-in provision of the ordinance. And so my reading of that is it's not narrowly applied. If you're a landlord and let's just imagine you're a landlord and you tell your tenants orally, or you send them a text message, which is not legal, but you send them a text message saying, this is your notice, you got to leave your unit, and the tenant leaves their unit, that tenant would be entitled, barring any other thing happening, that tenant would be entitled to relocation, despite the fact that the action was illegal that the landlord took, because it was still an action to recover the unit for owner move-in. And likewise, Board Member Vasilas, to answer your question, it's very long-winded, but just to compare that analogy to what you just asked, that, well, you can only do 1 owner move-in per unit, so how is it that their obligation is to 2 units? Well, if an owner served upstairs, if an owner physically served an upstairs unit and a downstairs unit, an actual notice of termination of tenancy, I don't think there would be any argument that those 2 tenants would be entitled to owner relocation payments, despite the fact that you cannot serve 2 tenants owner move-in notices for yourself to move into both units, because the action you took was to recover the unit for owner move-in. Does that clear? I'll probably let that.
I just kind of think it sets kind of a dangerous precedent, because if it, like, who's to say that someone doesn't just take that route in general and go, oh, I'm just going to say I'm moving into the entire building, everyone moves out, and then I only have to pay X amount versus having to go through a different avenue that could be way more costly. So it just seems there's too much gray area there for me. It just seems like if you're going to do an owner move-in, you have to follow strict methods in which to do so. And if you don't, that owner move-in should be nullified. Otherwise, if it's just kind of up in the air, it seems like there's a lot of room for abuse or misuse or misunderstanding.
Right. So what I would say is that interpretation would then premise a tenant's rights to whether or not the landlord successfully met their obligation. You would tie the landlord following their obligation to a legal T to an elicitation of a tenant's right. And I'm not sure if that's the purpose of the ordinance. And I don't think that would lead to conclusions that weren't obtuse. So for instance, if a landlord attempted to do an owner move-in, served the notice, but the notice was defective because they forgot something on there, I don't know, right? And the tenant moves out. Under the rule you announced, the tenant would not be entitled to it because the owner move-in that they tried to do was not legal, it was faulty. If I'm understanding your example.
Yeah, but isn't there some recourse there too, where if they moved out, you'd have to move them back in and pay for their costs? I mean, I think that's in the ordinance, isn't it?
There is a right to return for sure, but I'm not sure the ordinance doesn't require them to pay for the costs.
I think I think I read that it was costs going in, out, and back in, or something.
It would be odd that they would retain their right to return, which is a lawful right given under the ordinance, but they wouldn't retain their relocation payment rights.
Right.
Right. So if a faulty notice gives you the right to return, then a faulty notice must give you relocation payment rights as well. Why would they be decoupled in any way?
Yeah. I mean, I don't. It just seems the whole thing just seems a bit unclear.
I think that's fair. So what I would suggest is, I think that's fair and it's legitimate, and you all can have that conversation. If you want me to go over more of the law, I'm definitely more than willing to do that. And I think I should probably, before you all render your decision, but I think we should probably move on to the arguments unless anyone else has questions.
Okay. Ms. Mishik, your hand is still up. Did you wish to speak to it? Excuse me. Mr. Vasilis, are you finished now with your questioning?
I am for now. Yeah, definitely.
For the moment. Thank you. All right. Now, Ms. Mishik, did you have a comment that you wish to bring to us?
I have a clarifying question, or would it make more sense for us to hear arguments first and then return to this issue? I just have some clarifying questions, but whichever procedure seems more efficient.
I think probably let us go, unless there's someone else that wishes to speak on this, let's go ahead and hear the arguments.
Sure, that's fine.
And then we can come back, and Mr. Oceanuga won't be leaving us. He'll be still here to chat with us as well. Okay, so may we hear from the appellant, please? And you have, I believe it is 7 minutes.
He get 5 minutes first. And
5 minutes first.
Yeah.
Oh, and then a 2-minute rebuttal. Okay.
2 minutes rebuttal. So, Mr. Sharma, I'm going to, hold on 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen with a timer so that way you can see how many minutes you have, okay? Mr. Sharma?
Yeah, okay, my son's gonna speak up.
Okay, no problem. I'm gonna share my screen with a timer so that way you can see how many minutes you have, okay?
Okay, yeah, hello. So we only had, the entire property was only leased to one person, Nishchal Raj Bandari. And that's how we have it, as one home. As per the Richmond Building Department, the rent program reestablished the property and started calling it upper and lower unit to collect more fees. 2, regarding the security deposit, Nishchal Raj Bandari dealt a lot of damage to the property. We took pictures and proof and obtained estimates of repair from licensed contractors. Besides the extensive damage, Nishchal Raj Bandari also owes the landlord back rent and late rent charges. And the total for that amount owed is $7,643.21. 3, Roshan and Deepika Dahal were unauthorized occupants. They secretly moved in without the landlord's permission, and the landlord did not have a lease agreement with them. The landlord did not collect rent or security deposit from either of them. Their petitions are illegitimate and bogus. The landlord's attorney legally evicted both Roshan and Deepika Dahal as they were unlawful detainers. Lastly, the hearing examiner, Mr. Paul Cohen, intentionally hides addendum number 1, which it was a part of the lease agreement. And the addendum clearly states that tenants pay all utilities. Mr. Paul Cohen is finding sneaky ways to turn things in tenants' favor. And this is a case further investigation because Mr. Paul Cohen manipulated the entire case in tenants' favor. Furthermore, during the telephone hearing, Mr. Paul Cohen yelled disrespectfully at the landlord. He has been treating the landlord unfairly. This man is unfit to make an impartial decision, and his decision is clearly one-sided.
Okay, top of that, Mr. Nischal Rajpandari broke the lease agreement multiple times during his entire tenancy with us. He's been given multiple written warnings. He always ignored all the warnings. And he always tells us, I'm going to go to the rent board. He blackmailed the landlord every time. Roshan Casey and Deepika Dahal were a sub-tenant of Nischal Rajpandari. They moved in without our permission, and we were disputed from day one. And they were not my tenant. And Roshan Casey been texting the landlord, and he's trying to make it look like that we been communicating with each other, which the police, we called the police, he been harassing us. The police came over there, they told him, you cannot text the landlord because you don't have no lease agreement. You came in without landlord's permission. So he stopped. Then he turned off the water heater, and then he called our attorney that we turned it off. We never turned water heater off. He is trying to put some dirt on us. So this is the things that we've been dealing with. These both Nepali people, they gang up on the landlord. They've been threatening us. Even Roshan Casey was carrying a weapon over here. And he's trying to look like he's a victim, but we were victim of their harassment. So this is not a typical duplex. This is like one house with 1 meter, 1 mailbox. And the entire property was leased to one guy. And this Roshan Casey, where he come from, we don't know. Mr. Nischal Rajpandari brought him here, and he told us a week later that I have a new tenant. Who is he? He's not a landlord. He's not authorized to bring anybody here. So we've been fighting with him since day one. He's not my tenant. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the appellants? Hearing none, all right. May the respondents, may we have your statements, please?
Okay, 1 second. Let me reset the timer.
Thank you. Please identify yourself so that it's clear on the on our tape.
So who's gonna go first? There's two respondents. So you're gonna, how you would like to do this?
Can I go first? My name is Nischal. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your clock has started.
Okay, thank you guys. So first the lease was on my name and my brother-in-law's name because he used to live with us. And then after they moved out, and I had we had a verbal agreement with the landlord bringing the Roshan and Deepika and their children, right? And then after a month or so, he wanted to increase the rent. And he even filed a petition like on September 17th, I believe, to the Richmond rent to increase the rent because he had like 2 kids more. So that's why he wanted to increase the rent. He knew everything about the Roshan and Deepika. And we had a hearing, I believe it's on November 14. And the hearing examiner said he cannot increase the rent. So he played a game and he told us to move out. So he gave me a warning and he wants to do the owner moving. And then I left with my family on January, January 2020. And after I left, he just harassed my friend Roshan because he said he was illegally over there. But the fact was he knew everything about Roshan and they had like a couple of email exchange and the text exchange and everything. And I got half of my rent relocation fee or something, but he haven't paid me half of it. And I filed the petition, and the security deposit is Roshan gave me like 1,200 security deposit, and I asked landlord what I'm gonna do with this deposit, and he told me to give it to my brother-in-law because he was moving out. So I gave that half deposit to my brother-in-law, and he left. So that's all the facts. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I think I'm done. Yeah.
Have you completed then everything that you want to say? For the record, you do have another 4 minutes.
No, I think I'm good. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Roshan?
In that case, then we'll be hearing from the appellant. They have a 2-minute rebuttal. Ms. Shaw will tell you when you can start because she's resetting her timer.
Okay, I just want to make sure, did Rashawn want to speak, the other respondent?
Okay, yeah, I wanted to say something.
To finish
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Can I go now?
Yes.
Yes, continue.
Okay, so I was looking for a room, and my friend Nishal, I talked with him, and he said they have a room available, and he said his landlord told him to find someone, nice people, to live there, live lawyer in it, and he found me. Nishal found me, and Nishal told me, so you can move in there, and he told me he already talked to his landlord, and I moved there, and few days later, Sarma came to meet me, and we have talked, and he came with application form. Sarma came with application form, and we fill up the application form, me and my wife. We fill up the application form, and he asked for the money for application. I gave him $80, $40 each for one application, and he took that money. So I pay through the check. And he told us, like, you guys can live here. And everything was fine, we lived there for like 2-3 months. After 2-3 months, I think he went to file a rent increase in Richmond City. And then all the problem started, he wants to increase the rent, and Nishal and we was disagree because we appeal, we don't want to pay like more rent, and then we lived there for a total like 6 months, and there was no problem. He doesn't say anything before like 5 months. There was no problem, nothing, and then okay, let me just think. Okay, and then he started harassing us, like he just told me like I turn off the water heater because I did not that, because what should I do that, he turned off the water heater, and he called the police to throw me out from there because I was living there illegally. And he come every day and knock my door. And I was in work, and there's my wife and kids there, and he always fed them. You guys have to leave because you are living here as a legally. And he just said there right earlier. He said like I bring the knife for him. I never do that. I'm not like not kind of like that guy, you know. He lie. He just speak like, you know, the wrong. He's liar. And he harassed us, you know. He did a lot of things. He called the police, and because of I was texting him because he was my landlord, you know. That's why I text him. There was like so many things to need to be fixed. Door, we were not able to close that door. We live like that for a long time, you know. We are not able to close that door. It was very hard to close that door, and I told him multiple times to fix that. And I also text him, and whenever he comes to my apartment, I always tell him, and he comes to fix that the other things himself, you know. He comes there like more than like 15 times, and we talk a lot. And I know him, and he knows me. I know he knows me, and my family, you know, live there. So he's lying everything what he said. Yeah, and he sent me the letter and said, well, you guys need to get out from this house in 5 days. And I didn't have place to move, and I finally found my friend helped me to for a month. You know, I got a temporary place to live, and I had to move from there because of he harassed me. Because I was scared.
Mr. Roshan, excuse me, sir, but your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me redo the timer. And then I can.
Pardon me, Cynthia, what?
Oh, no, I'm just redoing the timer. I'm just.
Oh, okay. All right. Did staff or board members have any questions that you wanted to ask of the respondent? Okay, in that case, what we'll do is we'll now have a 2-minute rebuttal by the appellant. Mr. Sharma, did you wish you or your son to take the time that is available to you?
Yes.
Begin, please.
Okay. I did not tell Roshan Casey to get off from the property. We did a legal way. We went to the attorney. The attorney is the one who gave him notes, and he's the one who evicted them. This guy had no lease agreement with us, and he was not paying rent. He was living free. And all the story he's making, he's a lie. Both Nishchal Rajpandari and Roshan Casey, they are lying. They're making up story. They are both Nepalese. They're ganging up on the landlord. We never lied to them. We never did anything wrong. We went obeying with the legal process. We didn't do anything stupid. We went following all the rules. Our attorney was following, actually. He's the one who gave him a note. So he's the one who evicted him. So this guy cannot be trusted because he's now saying that there's a lot of things are broken. Why he moved into a property that was not to his standards? Why he moved in without our permission? I just found as a surprise when I came in, he was sitting with his kids, and he also had 2 other women, which we didn't know. When we are coming here, they go away somewhere, or they're hiding in the bedrooms. There's about 12 people living, and all the neighbors over here, they're telling us there's multiple people living here. Nishchal Rajpandari even subleasing the property, and this is a proof that Roshan Casey is brought by Nishchal Rajpandari. We never brought him here, so he's not my landlord. I mean tenant. So I'm not responsible for his security deposit because I never collected any rent or any security deposit from him. So he's not entitled to any move or relocation fees.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Thank you. All right, now what I would like to do, rather than open it back up to the board members and staff, I'd like to know if there are any speakers to this item, and we'll hear them if there are.
There were no public speakers on this item.
All righty, very good. In that case, I think it may be premature to ask just directly for a motion. Let's discuss this a bit and see where you're feeling on each of the 4 items that are in front of us. Comments, please. Any questions, staff?
Well, I thought board member Mishek, I thought you had a few questions that you were reserving.
Ms. Mishek?
Yes. They were clarifications around the double tenancy issue, or the owner move-in issue. But I feel like that's relevant to items 3 and 4 and not 1 and 2, right? Or is it just in general?
Well, perhaps what we might do is take each of the individual recommendations, take them individually and discuss them and see where we want to go with them. And then we can have discussion on each item and then determine how we want to make a motion, whether we want to say yes on some or no on some, or whatever it is that you want to do. Is that acceptable to you? Okay, then let's break it down by item. Item number 1, the affirmation of the hearing examiner's findings that the appellant engaged in improper utility charges and the consequent award of $1,951.81. May I have your comments, please? Okay. I'm going to take an informal question about affirmation of this particular item. If we were going to be drafting a motion, would you be in acceptance of that, of item number 1? And Cynthia, would you be good enough to call the roll on this? This is informal, this is not a motion, but we want to know if we agree on item number 1 or not.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was printing out some more motions.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, dear. You might hear my printer going off. Okay, just so I can make sure I have everything separate. So this is for number 1, which is the first recommendation?
That is correct. And this is informal. This is not a motion.
Okay. Okay, so you want me to ask each board member?
Would they vote yes or no on this?
Okay.
Or just give us, not either vote yes or no. Folks.
If I can just interject real briefly, the board members aren't compelled to tell anyone which way they're going to vote until they're compelled by an actual formal roll call. So I think you can have the conversation and try to poll the members, but if they don't want to reveal that, they don't have to.
Okay, all right. That's absolutely fine. All right, now, again, may we do this roll call, please?
Okay, so board member Connor.
I don't know yet.
Okay. Board member Johnson.
Yes.
Yes to what? That you're ready to vote on item for number 1?
Yes.
Okay.
And you would vote in the affirmative on item number 1 is where I'm trying to find out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, and then board member Vasilis.
I'm still pretty unsure on that as well. I mean, I understand the legality of it. I think Charles or Mr. Oceanuga outlined it pretty well. If we're to assume that it's 2 tenancies, then it seems to just be a matter of law, but it's still a little unclear because if a property with, I mean, is there 2 addresses on this property or is it just 1, by the way?
I have it listed as 1 address. me just check just in case, but I believe I have it listed as one address, lower and upper unit.
Yeah, so it's really confusing because if there's nothing to stop a landlord for renting out this building to one tenant who occupies one unit, and then have an agreement that states that they have to pay all the utilities because there's only one meter, of course they're only going to pay all the utilities, right? But then all of a sudden, if you add another tenant to the bottom unit, then that upper tenant gets all their utilities back for the previous portion of time. It just seems it's an unusual situation. I mean, usually, you have some sort of separate meters, but in this case, you don't. So it's a little precarious to me. So I'm going to wait on that one too.
Okay. And the next individual, call the next person, please.
Sorry, using my printer again, sorry. Vice Chair Mishek?
I'm affirmative pending some questions and clarification.
Okay. All right, and Chair Finley.
All right. I think it's clear that we need to have more discussion on this item. So let's leave this open and we will revisit it.
Okay, so for number one, we're just gonna, so that's just to give you just a preliminary.
And we're still going to have a vote on it, no question, but there
Yes.
will be further discussion on this particular item.
So for
All right.
Okay.
All right, let's go to number two then.
Okay, so for number two, Board Member Connor.
I'm still not sure.
Okay. All right, Board Member Johnson.
Okay, so I don't have the recommendations in front of me for some reason. What's number two?
Is to affirm the hearing examiner's finding that respondent Rashawn KC and Deepika Dahal were entitled to relocation payments and subsequent award of $6,486, as the record contains substantial evidence to support the finding that appellants took an action to terminate respondents Rashawn KC and Deepika Dahal tenancy for a purpose of owner move-in.
Okay, I'm gonna wait before I just vote on that.
Okay. Okay. Board Member Vasilos.
This is the, sorry, this
Number
is.
two is to affirm the hearing examiner's findings for the subsequent award of $6,486.
I'm going to vote no on that.
You want to vote no on that? Okay. And Vice Chair Mishek?
And this is where the double owner move-in issue comes into play, correct? Okay, so I'm undecided at this point.
Okay.
Then again, we don't have to go any further. Clearly, this is going to require more discussion. And I don't see where, well, let's go to item number 3. And item number 3 is to reverse the portion of the hearing examiner's decision that awarded respondents Rashawn KC and Deepika Dahal $699.39 in security deposit, as respondents Rashawn KC and Deepika Dahal did not file a petition asserting appellant improperly withheld their security deposit. The award of $699.39 should be reversed to $0. Okay, Cynthia, let's begin a roll call.
Okay, for 3? This is for 3?
This is number 3.
Okay,
May I suggest something, because it's a little odd to do roll calls? Perhaps Chair Finley, you can just call on each, you can do what Ms. Shaw is doing and call
Okay.
the board member and see where their position is.
All righty. Let us start then with Ms. Johnson.
So I agree they should be reversed.
Okay. Ms. Connor.
I agree as well.
Okay. Mr. Vasilas.
I agree.
Okay. Ms. Mishek.
Just for clarification, Charles, sorry, Mr. Oshanuga, we this is like normally what the rent board does, right? This is typically how we deal with this particular issue, is because there was nothing filed.
Oh, yes. If there's no petition, yeah, that's consistent with our past or your past decisions.
Okay, then I also vote yes to reverse it.
Okay, and I would be voting yes as well. In that case, I think we can take this one off the board and have a vote on it when we finally get around to a vote. All right, everybody? Okay, let's go to number 4, which is a reverse the portion of the hearing examiner's decision that awarded Nishal, and please, by the way, my apologies for the mispronunciations, for Nishal and Monica Rajhandare, $699.39 in security deposit, as the record does not contain substantial evidence the respondents met their burden of proof demonstrating that 1, the security deposit was paid to the appellant, 2, that the amount which was paid, or the amount of which was paid, and 3, that the appellant retained the amount despite the conditions of the rental unit not exceeding the cumulative effects of ordinary wear and tear or pre-existing the tenancy. The award of $699.39 should be reversed to 0. All right, Ms. Johnson, may we begin with you, please?
So I'm gonna hold off on that.
Okay. Ms. Connor.
I would agree with the reversal.
Okay. Mr. Vasilis.
I agree.
Ms. Mishek.
I'm going to hold off as well.
Pardon me?
I'm going to hold off on affirming or not, or yes or no for now.
Okay, all right. In that case, we will discuss that one further as well. So I'm going to go back now to item number 1 and open to your comments and concerns, whatever. I see Ms. Mishek, yes.
So these are some clarifications. So it sounds like the law is that every unit has to be separately metered, correct? Every unit that's been established has to be separately metered?
No, the law is if you're going to charge utilities, you can only charge utilities if the utility is on a separate or individual meter.
And so the landlord did charge utilities, correct?
Yes.
But they were not on separate meters.
No, the individual units did not have separate meters.
And then my understanding was that the issue of tenancy is not up for debate, right? That's a fact of this case.
That is a fact that's been found, but and you don't debate that because you're not fact finders, only if you do a de novo review. But you can, you're not bound by any. I'll just read the standard, just the part that I wrote in my recommendation, that where the hearing examiner has made errors in law or clearly erroneous conclusions are drawn from the evidence, the board need not defer to those conclusions or those erroneous, just those conclusions. So if you're going to, it's incredibly rare because this is not de novo. This is substantial evidence. So you typically, yes, you take that as a fact. If you're not going to take that as a fact, then you got to have a lot of articulable facts as to why that wasn't, why that's a clearly erroneous conclusion drawn from the evidence.
So to follow this line of logic, we're based on that. We can't say 100 million%, but it's pretty much a fact that these were all tenants, right? It seems like it was acknowledged by the landlord via seeking a rent increase, right? So why would you seek a rent increase if you don't have more tenants? Is that correct?
It would be, yeah, well, it'd be opposite, right? So it's not that you have to have 100% or however you articulated it in terms of, the confidence you have in these factual findings. It is that the factual findings are 100%. It is clear that that's the standard you start from. And it's the person who's challenging the findings burden to demonstrate that they are not. And they have to do that by presenting an argument or an articulation that demonstrates a clearly erroneous conclusion drawn from the evidence. So essentially, just to be clear, you take the facts as they are. You're not hearing examiners, you're not fact finders, unless you do de novo. You take the facts as they are, and taking that fact that they're tenants, that there's a tenancy, because that's what the hearing examiners found, you explore the conclusions drawn by law, i.e., did the landlord violate the law by charging utilities?
And is it a fact? And is it a fact that these, or is it a fact based on the hearing examiner and that these are two separate units? Are we to take that as fact? Okay, so.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but the two separate units are precluded from debate because it's a legal term, but it's an issue I'll just say it for the record, but it's an issue there's issue preclusion on whether or not there's two units. And what that means is when you had a prior hearing and you had the availability to contest the evidence and go back and forth, or you failed to appeal and exhaust your remedies, everything that happens in that prior hearing is binding in any future hearing, right, on the issues found. So the landlord had a prior procedure where he contested whether or not there were two units, and he lost. He failed to appeal that to a hearing examiner. He failed to appeal it to the rent board. So that issue of two units is finished. You can't collaterally attack it on a different appeal. It's done. So that's not up for debate.
Okay, so we have two units. We have established tenancy, or we're assuming that as a fact. And if you're going to charge utilities, they have to be separately metered, and they weren't separately metered here. Correct?
Correct.
So what's the question here? Like,
well, my recommendation is consistent with your inquiry.
Okay.
Does Mr. Vasilis? Yes.
Well, I just had a quick question going back to what I had stated earlier. So if a tenant was to move in and have an agreement on a building such as this, right, which is, I guess, technically a duplex that's singly metered, right? Mm-hmm. Would it be illegal? Let's say there's just one tenant and one upper unit. Would it be illegal for the landlord to have the tenant pay for those utilities?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I haven't thought through that question.
So that's where I have issue with this, because I get the whole technicality of all this, but knowing that this is a very unique building, and if you were to move in and you require that, and there's only one set of meters for one unit, it would make sense. Like, yeah, sure. There's no issue of splitting it up between two different tenants because there's presumably just one tenant in the building and one meter. So I guess, was there a lapse in time that we've distinguished where the original tenant moved in and then later on a new tenant moved in down below? Is there an overlap there? Yes, or was it two tenancies that kind of happened at the same time?
In terms, well, for these two specific tenants, are you asking if there was a lapse?
Yeah.
So Nichelle, he was there prior to Roshan. So yes, Roshan wasn't living there for a period of time when Nichelle was occupying the upper unit. In terms of whether there was ever a lapse, I don't know. The record's unclear, so I can't draw that conclusion. I will say just two things. First, it's the law, right? And the law says if it's not individually metered, you can't do the utility charges. So if I was asked that question, I would just say that's the law, regardless of any practical implications or effects that the other hypothetical might paint. Second, this is the city of Richmond. It's not unusual for someone to have a single family home. This is not a single family home, by the way. I mean, for various reasons. The county doesn't, it's in my recommendation. It's part of the attachments you can all look to. The county has listed this as a duplex itself. It's not a single family home. It's also not unusual for duplexes to have a single metered. You know, this has been a big issue in California, and there's been state laws around it. So this is not an unusual circumstance.
Yeah, right.
But if you had a single family home, because it is a city of Richmond, and you decided, well, I'm going to split my home into two, and you do that, then obviously I'm addressing a prior point you made, Board Member Vasilis. Then it's also not unusual that there's one main address listed for the county, right, on the counties, and that's likewise here. There's one main address, and again, 1 meter is not unusual. What's the circumstance that differentiates this case with many others is the law in which this case operates under. This is in other jurisdictions. Within the city of Richmond, there is a very specific law that goes to the heart of this, and that's lacking in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, so I mean, that makes sense. It's just, there are a lot of buildings like that. It is somewhat rare for one address and one set of meters, but I completely get what you're saying. So rule of thumb for any landlord, if they have a building like that, they should never try to charge for utilities, because it's just going to be a can of worms down the line.
Absolutely. I mean, you can certainly come in and talk to a housing counselor, and staff will definitely walk you through that. And, you know, if it gets too complicated, we will refer you to a free attorney to walk you through that if you need legal advice. But yeah, some is if you don't have it, if it's not individually metered, don't charge, seek counsel or seek advice at the rent board.
All right.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Johnson and then Ms. Connor.
Okay, so the hearing examiner ruled that they should get their utilities back, or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And let me read what it says specifically so that we refresh our memory. It is, number one, affirms the hearing examiner's finding that appellant engaged in improper utility charges and the consequent award of $1,951.81 is the item. Okay, Ms. Connor.
So this is, and I think this kind of piggybacks off of board member Vasilov's question. It sounds like, and when I looked at the record, that a family, a multi-generational family, moved into this property initially. And people in the family moved out, and part of the family that was living upstairs moved out, and part of the family that was living downstairs moved upstairs. Because this was rented on one lease, the utilities weren't split, because the whole property on the original lease was rented to one whole family. And so this issue of separately charged utilities, in fact, came up because the tenant sublet the downstairs to someone outside of the family and wanted to be reimbursed for part of those costs. And so while I recognize that the owner would not have the ability to charge the tenant or force the tenant to pay the utilities separately, if it's not separately metered, I recognize that that's the issue. But the issue of the separately metered utilities didn't arise until the family decided to break apart and live separately, and the tenant decided to sublet the downstairs lower unit, which created the entire kerfuffle. And so it's really hard for me to want to rule or affirm the hearing officer's decision when in part it appears that the tenants created the problem. So I'm not sure how to rectify that. And I don't know that that's a question. That's just what I'm grappling with, so that the rest of the board members understand why I'm struggling, which is I'm not trying to be difficult when I say I don't know how I'm going to decide. I'm just struggling because that is an issue that I cannot resolve.
So let me just, a few things.
There was no question.
Oh, I know, but I think factually I'm not sure if the families were related in the very beginning. Certainly the respondent, Nichelle, and the family, I think in the upper unit were related, but Nichelle was not on the original lease, right? So I think the individuals on the original lease, I'm not sure if they were related. I would have to ask the parties. And then sometime after Nichelle moved in, and then the units went round and round. But one last thing, the rent ordinance, I'm gonna let you all figure out who caused what, but it's the landlord's obligation to have meters. And the issue of not being separately metered was always there. It just was brought to our attention when there was a deterioration in the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, which is often the case. You really don't know what's going on until someone is upset, and then they go figure out their rights, and then they want to enforce their rights. So I'll leave you all with there's no exception in the law to it's a landlord's obligation to get this thing separately metered. I'll leave it all to you to figure out whether or not the tenant caused the landlord to not meet that obligation.
I don't disagree with you that it's the landlord's obligation to ensure that they've met all the requirements, permitting, et cetera, utilities, whatever. But when I think it's the 2018 lease has Nishal on there. He is the brother-in-law of the other tenant. So there is evidence in the record that shows this was a family, a blended family, a extended family, I should say, living in this structure that was rented under one lease, where there would not necessarily be a division of utilities because there was a large family or blended family or extended family living in the entire space. So that, again, that's why I'm struggling. I'm not saying that there is probably not some misunderstanding of the law on both sides. That is the piece that I'm struggling with.
Right. So if you owned a fourplex or 5 or 10, let's say you own 10 units under the principle you've articulated or what you're struggling with. If you own 10 units in one property, okay, and use one lease, you have one lease and you lease off all 10 units, right, to a family, a generational family. So each family occupies one of these units. Under that principle, the landlord would not violate the law by charging the tenant's utilities because they're one whole family under one whole lease. I would posit that would be at odds with the law. The law doesn't turn on who's in the unit. The law turns on the characteristic of the unit. And if the characteristic of the unit is one that lacks a meter, then you cannot charge the utilities. And even if the violation doesn't arise, that doesn't mean the violation never occurred. In terms of the violation, even if the violation never comes to the surface to let us know that it's happening, doesn't mean that it hadn't happened. And again, I would all encourage you to not have the question turn on what kind of person is in the unit. It turns on the character of the unit.
So let me ask you this question. To whom was the tenant paying the utilities? Because it appeared as though the utilities were in the tenant's name. They weren't, but maybe I've missed something in the record.
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure.
That's the question, Mr. Oshanuga. If the tenants had the utilities in their own name, they weren't paying the landlord utilities. So if there was one lease and everybody was living there together and the utilities were in the names of the tenants, the landlord's not charging them. He's not splitting the utilities. It's not a separate charge. It's not an excess rent charge.
Then I think that's a great point. And I think then you all should explore that with the parties who are currently here, because they would be able to answer that question. So I would encourage you to explore that question. It's a good question.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask that now. So I can, but.
You certainly can.
I just didn't want to monopolize the time. I have a tendency to go on, and so I try to pause and breathe.
Could we clarify? So yeah, the utilities was in the tenant's name.
But may I intercede here just for a moment for clarification? As I understood this, the original tenants were paying the utilities to Mr. Sharma. And then when there was a change in the tenancy, then Mr. Sharma wrote up a lease that said that the 100% of the utilities would be paid by the residents. So this is not one situation that continued throughout. This is a situation that was changing.
Right, that's how I understood it as well. The addendum it's part of my recommendation. It's referred to in the landlord's addendum that makes the tenant 100% responsible. But I believe the landlord, through his son, just said that it was the tenant who paid. So in their name, was the utilities in the tenant's name? And if that's the question you're looking for, yeah, you might want to explore with the other parties, but I think he gave you the answer.
Okay, but then I have to go back to Ms. Connor's statement earlier, is we're not the finders of fact. We are the finders that have to look at what the hearing examiner determined. Is that not correct? Because that changes us then into a de novo hearing.
I agree with you. That's correct.
So I understand going for clarity, but we have to determine what we're doing in terms of this hearing. Ms. Mishak, did you have further comments on that?
Yeah, so maybe I'm missing something, but on page 13 of the recommendations, it says on March 1st, 2006, the appellant entered into a single written lease agreement to rent out 2 separate rental units. And this is prior to Roshan, correct? So that means that since 2016, this, at the very least, the landlord has been renting these out as 2 separate units.
Yes.
They should have been metered since 2016. So arguably, at the very least, the landlord's been breaking the law around the meters since before these tenancies were established with the people, the respondents right now, right?
I disagree. It's one lease. So the building is 2 units, but it's one lease, not several rental agreements. It's one rental agreement. So,
but I thought we're supposed to base it on the nature of the units. And I mean, tenancy doesn't, tenants' rights don't rest just on leases. Like you can move in and not have a lease and still have tenants' rights, correct? It's still a separate unit. There's still 2 separate units and they're being rented out separately. And then why does it say rent out 2 separate rental units?
Because the determination by the rent board, by the hearing officer, was that it was 2 separate units. There's an upper unit and a lower unit because they're separate keys. There's separate entrances. There's some other indicia that this was 2 separate units. But my confusion was simply that if the tenants had the utilities in their own names, the owner is not collecting utilities from the tenants. Right. That was where I was getting confused.
Right, but the point I'm trying to make is that they are recognized as 2 separate units, right? Whether there's an agreement or not, a lease agreement, they're recognized as 2 separate units. And so because they're recognized that way, whether it's under one agreement or one has no agreement, the other one has an agreement, it shouldn't make a difference. The law is that they both should have meters, right? And this precedes the tenants in question. They should have 2 separate meters, whether there's one lease agreement or not, right? So that's the first, that just seems irrespective of who is occupying what and what the agreement is, because tenants' rights don't rest solely on leases, right? And then the other thing is that if it's in the lease that the occupants, the agreement is that the occupants have to pay utilities, right? Isn't that compelling isn't that compelling you could argue based on the facts we have that that's compelling the tenants to pay for utilities to occupy the space, right? That's part of the agreement is they have to pay utilities in order to live there. So, I mean, he may not be collecting it necessarily, but they do have to pay them in order to live there, right? That's part of the terms of the lease.
Correct. If I briefly searched the record, so Board Member Connor, perhaps you have documents that maybe I overlooked, but the record doesn't contain. I'm sorry, I couldn't find anywhere in the record where I saw utility bills in the tenant's name. So if you saw that, do you mind pointing me to that?
I did not. That was my question. I think that I saw the lease that said the tenants were responsible for the utilities. Okay. So I don't think I saw any utility bills. But there is a document in Mr. Hold on. Let me see if I can. Mr. Raj Bandari. I am so sorry. I know I messed that up. In the petition that says he paid the utilities and then he collected 40% of that from Rashawn. And I can find that for you.
Okay, I think that's good enough. I can review it right now. Thanks.
Okay.
Ms. Johnson,
Okay,
let me go back for a moment. Ms. Mishak, did you have anything further you wanted to add at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry, please.
Okay, so there was an issue brought up earlier that the tenants, the problem started with when the tenants moved in downstairs and the apartment was subletted, and I thought I heard that said that was not, I mean, it was done with the landlord's full knowledge for several months. The landlord knew that these other tenants were there. And I also heard it said that the problem, everything was okay in the beginning until I believe around the time when the landlord was denied the rent increase. And maybe that's when around the time when the problem started. So that's something to consider.
Mr. Vasilis.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a remark. So it's not the duty of the landlord to have separate meters. That's like, most people would do that if it was, possible. It's pretty much impossible to do that on most buildings. But it's the fact that if you have a building that has one meter or does not have separate meters and you have multiple tenants, you cannot charge the tenants for those utilities because it's not straightforward. Who knows who's paying what? It's a cluster, right? So that's the idea. But what I think Board Member Connor's talking about, which makes this situation a little bit more unique, is the fact that this isn't a 10-unit building with separate garages, separate addresses. It does appear to be similar to a single-family house. So it's not that unusual to rent out the entire thing, not as like a bunch of units separated, but as a more so like a single-family house. And in that case, you have one tenancy, that one lease, one tenant that is consuming the entire house. And therefore it makes sense because they're the ones that are consuming all the utilities that they would pay the utilities. The way I'm reconciling it is that no landlord or a landlord should be educated going forward that no matter what, if you have a multi-unit building, regardless of what it may look like or how it compares to other types of multi-unit buildings, that you just don't allow the tenant to pay for the utilities themselves.
Yeah, that's correct. I will just add, in terms of Board Member Vasilis, in terms of the information you're providing writ large to the general public, that's absolutely correct. I would just add for this specific case, it's 2 rental units. I mean, I think that issue is just
right. I'm not debating that. I'm just debating the fact that because it's an unusual building, it makes far more sense that you could rent it out to one single tenant versus, let's say, a triplex with 3 garages, 3 everything, right? In being in the business, I understand why a landlord would think that you could do that, and it would make more sense than usual.
I hear you.
I'm not debating whether there's 1 or 2 units.
No, I hear you. And Board Member Connor, I did find that, so thank you for pointing that out to me. It doesn't answer the question, nor do I think the record contains who it was paid to, and so that's something we cannot, because it wasn't before the trial of fact, we cannot rely on any of the arguments to determine that. And that's the only clarification I wanted to provide.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
We're going to go to Ms. Mishak, and then I understand, Mr. Vasily, that you've just raised your hand again. So I'll come back to you. Ms. Mishak.
My question is, I mean, it's a rhetorical question / comment, but if I guess I don't understand, like, what's the point of legally classifying something as a duplex if we only treat it as a duplex based on who is living there, right? Like, because then we can say, okay, well, then a triplex, a family can move into a triplex and so on. So, I mean, I think there has to be some clear delineation of, like, it's been determined to be a duplex. So if everybody moves in, there's 2 separate rental units, because then we have to determine we would be tasked with determining who lives in which, what's their relationship, is it reasonable to assume that they would share costs, so on and so forth. And we could but then it's like, then why even call it two separate units? Why would that not just be determined on a case-by-case basis? And that seems cumbersome. And, you know, I mean, even if a married couple, one lived upstairs and one lived downstairs, we don't know what the situation, you know what I mean? Like it could be two totally separate tenancies. And so I think that if we go with the premise that we should assume that because they knew each other, we can reasonably think of this as one unit, that gets us into a lot of problems. I think not only like getting into the weeds, as I just said, but then it also starts assuming things like you have that, like you need to have a lease agreement for certain things to kick in. And that doesn't seem, I mean, I know that that's often the case, but there is tenancy established without lease agreement. So I think it's like recognizing what the units are seems more important here than the relationship between the tenants specifically.
Well, also the idea of what's gone on here is a case in point as to why, regardless of the initial tenant and whatever understanding you have, you should avoid this situation of allowing that tenant to pay for the utilities. Because maybe it's one family now, maybe it's two families later. It's just opening up the door for this type of conflict.
And I think that we can agree that it is clear that the appellant did charge utilities onto where legally wasn't supposed to.
I disagree, but I know that I'm in the minority, and that's fine.
All right. Is there anything further that we wish to do on this one? Okay. So that when we do, we'll hello. What have I just done?
We hear you.
Well, let's see what happens here. Sick of the 40-minute, what in the world are we talking about? The problem is, oh, hold on. Maybe this will do us. No, it won't. I'm going to join you back. I'll leave and join.
Okay.
No, cancel.
Well, we hear you and we see you. Did you lose
The problem is I can't see you.
Okay.
Let me try launching the meeting.
Did you go in? Remember at the top, it says view.
Well, you know what happened? I hit something on my computer and knocked us out.
Okay. If you want to rejoin to make it easier, you can.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to have to do. I'm sorry, everybody. Join the new meeting.
I don't know what the new meeting is, but okay. We'll wait for her to come back.
Sorry about that, folks. All right, so I think we have probably discussed this. We're just going to have to take a vote on it at some point and see where that lies, which means we're going to have to probably separate our votes on this.
Did you want to take a vote now after we've had this discussion on number one? Want to separate it now or come back later?
Mr. Oshanuga, do you have any desire on that one way or the other?
No.
Okay, then let's go ahead and let's take a vote on this. Item number one, affirm the hearing examiner's findings that appellant engaged in improper utility charges and the consequent award of $1,951.81. This is a vote. May we have a roll call, please? Or may we have a motion? We need a motion.
I move that we vote on the first recommendation.
So you can read what's on the recommendation for membership, vice chairmanship.
Okay, I move that we vote on the first recommendation, affirm the hearing examiner's findings that appellant engaged in improper utility charges and the consequent award of $1,951.81.
May we have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
So
May we have a vote, please?
Just before you begin voting, I'm sorry, just for the record, you're voting to affirm the hearing examiner's findings.
That's correct. That was my understanding of the motion. Is that correct, Ms. Mishek?
Yes.
Yes. Ms. Shaw, may we have a roll call?
Yes. Board Member Connor?
No.
Okay. Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Board Member Vasilos?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek?
Yes.
And Chair Finley?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes to affirm the hearing examiner's findings and the consequent award of $19.51.81. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Motion passes with Board Member Connor voting no.
Thank you. All right, maybe we go on to then item number 2 that we will be taking a vote on after additional discussion. It is to affirm the hearing examiner's findings that the respondents Roshan KC and Deepika Dahal were entitled to relocation payments and subsequent award of $6,486, as the record contains substantial evidence to support the finding that appellants took an action to terminate respondents Roshan KC and Deepika Dahal's tenancy for purpose of owner move-in. The floor is open. Do we have comments from anyone?
I'm just going to stick with what my original issue I had with it, where I just, I know that you can only serve one owner move-in on one single unit. And I don't think we can talk about, an action or whatnot, but I think we need to make it very clear, stick to the clarity of just having one owner unit, move in per unit.
Ms. Mishek.
I just wanted to ask the clarification question. So is it based on what you had read earlier, Mr. Oshanuga? Is it, so are we assuming it was owner move-in because that was the only reason he could evict both or terminate the tenancy for both units?
No, you don't have to. So let me see if I can parse out the question. So the facts that the hearing examiner found that supported his conclusion was that Roshan was not served with a notice for termination of tenancy for owner moving. So that's what you take as true, that he is actually not served. But the service of on the shell, the notice itself, because it contained language that included Roshan's bottom unit, that it was broad enough to terminate, that it in fact terminated his tenancy, or at least attempted to terminate his tenancy for owner movement as well. So let me just repeat that. Roshan was not given a physical notice, a 60-day notice to terminate his tenancy for owner movement. That's what the hearing examiner found. But he also found, though, that the upper unit, the shell, was given a 60-day notice. And in his notice, and it's part of the record on the attachments, it mentions the lower unit. And because it mentions the lower unit, it's seeking possession of both upper and lower unit for owner movement. And therefore, the action of owner movement was taken on both the upper and lower units. And one last thing, I do think this is worth, there was a lot of conversations on the first one, which was good, but I also think this second one's worth a lot of conversation, and that's because your decisions that come out of this board, not the hearing examiner decisions, only your decisions have precedential effect. There's precedent there. And that just means that you are not bound, but your discretion is limited by your past decisions, right? So if you articulate a rule today, the public is going to look at that rule you've articulated, and they're going to, confirm their behavior to that rule. So if these facts right here constitute actions that would elicit owner relocation payments, then the public knows that what to expect. If it's more narrow and it's per unit, then the public knows that as well. But it's good that you have this conversation, that you're clear on whatever side you fall on, and that you enunciate a principle that the public will know how to conform their behaviors to.
Okay.
Can I ask more
Ms. Mishek.
So So in the I don't know if I can ask in the hypothetical, but let's say in the hypothetical that we decided that no, like an owner can only move in. Like, so if we were saying, okay, the owner can only like serve or give the reason as like of ending the occupancy as owner move-in per established unit, then what limitations, like I understand the limitations it would put for relocation, what limitations would that put on the landlord? Like, would they have to come up with something entirely different for the other units?
Well, that's not the rule. I think the rent board has established in the past that an owner can do essentially unlimited owner move-ins. So long as the owner move-in is not on their behalf. So if I have a fourplex and I have 3 children, I can do, or I have parents and a grown child, I could do an owner move-in on the top, on unit A, my parent in unit B, et cetera, et cetera. And I could do it all at the same time. And each unit would be owed relocation payments. That's the regulation that the board adopted earlier this year. So that's the current rule. I think and I could be wrong, board member Vasilas can speak on his own, but I heard his comments to mean that you can't perform an owner move-in on 2 separate units for yourself, but I could be wrong with what, okay, I see him shaking his head. So I think that was his point. I will say, whatever you decide, and it's a good question, you should try to tether yourself as closely as you can to the actual law that we're evaluating, right? And if you look at page 18, it's the very last paragraph of my recommendation. If you want to see what the law says, it's a copy and paste of the law. You can also look to the relocation ordinance. But I think you should all look to that law, and it's a permanent relocation of payment shall be provided pursuant to the requirements of this chapter by any landlord who takes action to terminate a tenancy for the reasons specified in section, and it quotes owner movement and withdrawal. And it's your job to evaluate whether or not the hearing examiner's findings that Roshan was entitled to owner movement payments, whether or not those findings were supported by substantial evidence, or whether his interpretation of that provision I just read was clearly erroneous, and that provision says something other than what he said. Perhaps the action that was taken was, you think that's something different than what he used to justify his conclusion.
And just to clarify, the tenant who is to be awarded the 6,400 was never served this notice. It was the upstairs tenant.
That's right. That's the finding. That they
if we're talking about 2 separate tenancies and we're assuming that to be true, then at the very least, both tenants should be served. Right.
Yeah. I'm agreeing with you generally. You can all debate. I'm not sure. When I read this, and you can read my recommendation, it's a remedial statute. There's certain law that I quoted. It's on page 18 as well of the recommendation. It's a Park Merced, San Francisco case. And essentially, when you have a remedial statute, they have to be read liberally. They have to be liberally construed to effect its purpose, which means you read it as broadly as you can to achieve whatever goal that it's meant to be achieved. And I cite the purpose of the relocation ordinance, which was to mitigate to help to mitigate the challenges faced by tenants who are ordered to vacate a rental unit through no fault of the tenant. That's the purpose. And so based on that, you interpret the ordinance and what it means, and you come to your own conclusions. But the recommendation is there. I'm not going to repeat everything that's in there.
All right, if there are no other questions or discussion, are we prepared then to, anyone prepared to make a motion? I don't like making motions, but since I see no.
Should I do this again? I move to affirm the second recommendation. Sorry, I need to pull it up and read it.
I can insert the.
I have it.
Oh, good.
I found it. Affirm the hearing examiner's findings that respondents Roshan, Casey, and Deepika Dahal were entitled to relocation payments and subsequent award of $6,486. As the record contains substantial evidence to support the finding that appellants took an action to terminate respondents Roshan, Casey, and Deepika Dahal's tenancy for purpose of owner move-in.
Very good. May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. Without Ms. Johnson, am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Cynthia Michaud, may we have a roll call, please? We have a motion and a second.
Board Member Connor.
Sorry, did I mute myself too fast? Sorry about that. Yes.
Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Board Member Vasilos.
No.
Vice Chair Mishek.
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion passes to affirm the hearing examiner's findings for recommendation number 2. Passes with Board Member Vasilos voting no.
Thank you. Let us go on now to item number 3. And this item reads as, reverse the portion of the hearing examiner's decision that awarded respondents Roshan Kaisi and Deepika Dahal $699.39 in security deposit, as respondents Roshan Kaisi and Deepika Dahal did not file a petition asserting appellant improperly withheld their security deposit. The award of $699.39 should be reversed to zero. It's open. The floor is open.
Chair
You're open.
We discussed that we all agreed on number 3, correct?
Yes, but I don't want to just rush into it. However, if somebody wants to make a motion and go straight to that, that's okay too.
I so move.
All right. And do you want to read that into the actual motion into the record?
No, you just did it.
Okay. All righty. Ms. Shaw, may we have a roll call, please?
Oh, we need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Wait a second. I need a second. Hello?
I'll second.
Okay, I second the motion.
Okay.
All right. I think Ms. Johnson, were you first on that second, or did you also try and second that?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Mishak, I think Ms. Johnson came before you, so we'll accept her second.
That's fine. I was just trying to shake it up a little since she's.
I do appreciate that. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
All right. Roll call, please.
Yes. Board Member Connor.
Yes.
Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Board Member Vasilos.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mishek.
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes to reverse a portion of the hearing examiner's decision for recommendation number 3 passes unanimously.
Thank you. Let us go then to item number 4, which reads, reverse the portion of the hearing examiner's decision that awarded Nishal and Monika Rajhaddari $699.39 in security deposit, as the record does not contain substantial evidence the respondents met the burden of proof of demonstrating that 1, the security deposit was paid to the appellant, 2, the amount which was paid, and 3, that the appellant retained the amount despite the conditions of the rental unit not exceeding the cumulative effects of ordinary wear and tear or pre-existing the tenancy. The award of $699.39 should be reversed to zero. The floor is open.
I would so move.
Okay, and that is a move to reverse?
Yes.
All righty. Ms. Shaw, are you clear on the verbiage for the motion?
Yes, it's number 4. We're on number 4, but we need a second.
We are indeed, and we do need a second, and I believe I see Ms. Mishek's hand up. Is that a second there?
No, I thought we were going to discuss number 4.
Right, because for the first poll, it sounded like Board Member Johnson wasn't sure and Vice Chairman Scheck wasn't sure.
Okay, perhaps I moved too quickly because I didn't see any hands come up when I asked for responses from the floor. So that's what I was responding to. So we're certainly, I'll reopen it to the floor.
Okay, so is that motion dead?
Wait a minute. We had a first and a second on that motion,
No, we did
unfortunately.
not have a second. We only had a first motion. That was Board Member.
Only a
Cox.
first? All right.
Okay, so the second, it failed because we
in that case, if we do not receive a second, then we will go back to the floor for discussion.
Okay.
All right. I don't hear a second. Therefore, let us go to the floor. Ms. Mishek, I believe that you had your hand up.
I would just appreciate some from Mr. Oshanuga, some clarity on what the rent board typically does here, as with number 3. And yeah.
Well, okay, so this is unlike number 3, where there was a failure to petition. Number 4, upstairs tenants did petition for security deposit. Because they are the petitioner, they carry the burden of proof. And they have to prove by preponderance of the evidence those 3 elements I listed out. Number 1, that they paid security deposit to the appellant. 2, that the amount in which they paid. And 3, that the appellant retained the amount despite the conditions of the rental unit not exceeding the cumulative effects of ordinary wear and tear or pre-existing detenancies. So here, the record supports that the tenant put on substantial evidence to demonstrate that they did pay the security deposit to appellant. They also articulated the amount in which they paid. But when you get to number 3, the record is almost completely empty in terms of the conditions of the rental unit, right? So the tenants are arguing that the landlord had to return this money to me because I left the rental unit in a condition that was, substantially similar to how I inherited the rental unit. That's just paraphrase, right? And so that's the tenant's burden of proof. They didn't put on any evidence, aside perhaps testimonial evidence, which is evidence, to say as much, but they didn't put any photographic evidence or evidence you typically would see in these kind of instances. Whereas the landlord countered with over 40 pictures showing the conditions of the unit, and as part of the recommendation in the exhibits, and the pictures show that the unit was not left in a condition where I think would justify return of the monies. I will say, and I've said this in the recommendation, I want to be really clear to the parties too, because I understand it could be confusing, that the issue before the rent board is just an excess rent issue. It's not a security deposit issue, right? Like you can go to civil court and do all that stuff. Here, we're only looking at the excess rent. So we don't look at damages. The landlord has said that the tenant caused X amount of damages. We don't rule on that. That's not before us. It's outside of our jurisdiction. We just look at to see if they retained it in a manner that was impermissible. And here, based on my review of the evidence, I don't think the records contain substantial evidence to justify the hearing examiner's findings that the landlord did impermissibly retain a portion of it. And one last thing, or 2 more things, in my recommendation, you'll see that the hearing examiner relied on a photograph to say this was the condition of the unit in which it was returned to the landlord. However, that photograph was provided by Roshan, who was in the lower unit, but Roshan didn't petition, right? And so his unit's not up for contest. So you look at just the upper unit, and the upper unit tenants didn't provide any photographs, as far as I could tell, that would depict the conditions of those units. So you couldn't rely on the condition on the bottom unit to prove the condition of the top unit. And secondarily, you'll see in my recommendation, I explained when the hearing examiner evaluated the petitions, he evaluated one grand sum, right? He didn't, if this is actually 2 tenancies, which it is, right? And it's two separate units, that means there's 2 separate security deposits. That means both security deposits are evaluated as separate figures, not as one whole figure. And that, in the conflation of the numbers, led to conflation of various other issues like the photographs. And finally, the burden of proof, the hearing examiner impermissibly swapped the burden of proof. And in his decision, he said that the landlord failed to demonstrate that the unit, the condition of the unit prior to move-in or after move-in. And it's not the landlord's burden to prove either of those things. The landlord can provide evidence, but that evidence has nothing to do with burden shifting. All that means is when the opposite party provides evidence, that means that it just makes the job harder for the petitioner because they have to overcome now this mountain of evidence that they're facing or explain it away. So based on all those things, my recommendation was to reverse.
And just as a final question for myself, so when the burden of proof, those three elements that are listed should be present to meet their burden of proof. So even though they met the first two, because they didn't meet the third criteria, they didn't meet their full burden of proof here. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Board Member Connor, I'll second this time if you give it a go again.
Oh, now you want a second.
All right. In that case, we will leave the floor and I will ask for a motion.
This is for the second, right?
Wait, I need a motion first.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, the second. We already, okay, I'm confused. We took Board Member Connor's motion first.
I'm sorry, you did?
Yes.
Okay, so she made the motion and now may we have a second?
Yes. I will second the motion.
Okay,
all right.
So the
Very
first
good.
one, and now it's Board Member Connor did it again.
Right, I'm renewing my motion and
And
Vice Chair Mishek is second.
Got it. Okay, and let me take a vote. Board Member Connor.
Thank you.
Yes.
Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Board Member Vasilos.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mishek.
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion passes to reverse a portion of the hearing examiner's decision. Recommendation number 4.
If I can just, one last thing, I'm sorry, you all, just kind of put buttons and suspenders on this thing. In my recommendation, I did not mention, or in my recommendation, I did mention the landlord's claim of bias, right? But in my final overall adoption, reverse affirm, it's nowhere there. I think it's appropriate for you all to find on that issue of whether or not the hearing examiner was biased. And I say that because, if this goes on writ, I think the Superior Court judge is going to look for to see whether or not you found on that issue, right? So it's in my it's in my recommendation. It's been discussed. I put there that there was no bias. I state the reasons why there was no bias. I obviously will recommend to the board that they pass a motion finding that the hearing examiner was not biased in this hearing. For those of you who may have not seen it, it's my recommendation is based on the fact that not only did the hearing examiner weigh all the evidence, there was no evidence that the hearing examiner turned off the recording, that the hearing examiner went through and explained to the parties that he's neutral, that he permitted both parties to examine each other, cross-examine, enter evidence, even enter evidence after the fact, that he held the hearing open for more evidence to come in. And finally, when you look, and of course the hearing examiner is entitled as a trier of fact to not believe a party or to believe a party. That's just kind of how trier of facts work. But finally, if you look to page 28 of my recommendation, you'll see just a list of 4 instances in which the landlord completely, his statements were inconsistent and dishonest. The fact that I'll let you read through them all if you're curious, but they're all listed out there. But based on all those facts, I think it's my opinion that the hearing examiner was not biased and that the landlord was not deprived of due process. But I do think you should make a finding on that. I'm
going to break my own rule and make a motion if I may. But let's go to the floor. Does anybody else want to say anything first?
Can I ask where is this located so that way I can note it for my records? Where is it located?
You're not going to find the exact language that's going to, but you can look to page 28.
Okay.
And right above the section of conclusion, but it's not going to be spelled out like it did on the last page.
Okay.
All right. Prior to my making a motion, I'm going to make a statement. I have been a rent board member for over 4.5, possibly almost 5 years now. And I have read all of the documentation that was submitted by both the appellant and the respondents. I have listened to not only all of the taped conversations, hours of it, but I have also listened to 5 years, almost 5 years of tapes that have been submitted by the hearing examiner. And I did not find any change or tonal responses that were inappropriate, or any type of action that was different from 5 years of listening to the same hearing examiner, discuss the issues, try and be fair with timelines, and to reach his conclusions. So my motion is going to be that based on the written record that we received in this case, and based on listening to the tapes regarding this matter, I found no evidence of bias and do agree with the final decision or recommendation of the city attorney. That's my motion. May I have a second?
We have a second?
If I could make a friendly amendment, Chair Finley.
Please.
If the motion is based on the record, there's no evidence of bias on the part of the hearing officer, I would second that motion.
And the comments I made before I said I would make the motion were really comments. So yes, that's good enough for a motion for me.
Okay, so based on that, okay, got it.
So if I can just add both board member, Chair Finley and board member Connor, if you can just add on to that, and that the appellant was not deprived of due process, that would clean up the motion.
I will accept that as a friendly amendment on both cases from Mr. Oceanuga and from Ms. Connor. Will you accept that, Ms. Connor?
Yes.
So
Very good.
I can't make a friendly amendment, so someone would have to make that or change it. Yeah, perhaps.
Okay, I understand your position. Would someone else make that friendly motion that was just verbalized by Mr. Oceanuga?
And Ms. Connor make it so then I can second?
Absolutely. So based on the record, we find that there's no bias on the part of the hearing officer and that no party was deprived due process.
Thank you. Ms. Mishek?
I was going to second the motion with the friendly amendment.
Make your amendment and see if it's agreeable to both Ms. Connor and myself.
Oh, I thought I was just seconding your motion with Ms. Connor's friendly amendment.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Right? Is that where we're at? Did I miss a step? I'm not adding anything.
Okay,
you're sick. Well, you see, it was Ms. Connor's second. You don't need to second her because I've accepted it.
Friendly amendment, which isn't a second, right?
A friendly amendment. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, to clarify, board member Connor, did you second the original motion subject to the friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a second already, and then
okay,
I think.
Sorry.
No worries.
I thought it was a friendly amendment with no second. I withdraw my second. I do not second.
Or third, or.
Well, and actually, Ms. Connor made 2 friendly amendments as it ended up. And so we're clear appropriately seconded. Is that correct, Mr. Oshanuga?
Yes.
Or do we need a third
No,
acceptance?
no, it's good.
Okay.
Confusing me.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shaw, I didn't hear that. What did you say, dear?
I just said I was just confused with the seconds and the thirds and the fourths. It's okay.
Are you clear now?
Yes, I'll just hear the recording. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
In that case, could you move us right along, please?
I believe Board Member Vassilas has his hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had a quick question. I'm just a little unsure of what the purpose of the motion is. So there's a claim of bias and we're saying that there's no bias. What if we said there was bias? Just a little.
That's right.
Yeah.
So part of the appeal was that that the hearing examiner was biased, right? And typically the recommendations will only recommend on the reversal, affirmation, or remand, right? That's what the regulations say. But when there's a claim of bias, I do think it's appropriate for the board to make a finding as to whether or not there was bias. If you find that there was bias, then the appellant would be entitled to a new hearing, right? And you start the entire process over. If you find on this record that there was not bias, then you just find that, and all your other findings stand. All your other motions continue to stand.
Okay, thank you.
Now it dawns on me that I was trying to move our agenda right along, but I didn't ever call for the vote. So we have a motion. We have a second with amendments. So now we will have Mr. Vassilas, do you have another question? Oh, your hand. Okay. All right. So now, Ms. Shaw, will you please call the vote, please?
Yes. Board Member Connor.
Yes.
Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Board Member Vassilas.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek.
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. This is the vote in regards to bias. I don't know the whole, I have to read the whole, listen to the recording, but in regards to the bias discussion, it passes unanimously.
Okay, now may we move on to item H1.
So let me speak real quick to the parties. Mr. Naresh Sharma and Rashan and Michelle. I just want to, I know this was a long one for you guys, but I just want to let you know that this concludes your appeal hearing for petition RC 20 T09394 and T106. And all parties will receive a decision on appeal within 30 days. Okay, so you're more than welcome. You can leave the meeting now.
Okay, so I have a question. Can I?
What type? Well, we're actually concluded. What type of question?
No, it's okay. Thank you. I'll just email you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Feel
Thank
free
you.
to email me your questions. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Okay, on to H1, please.
Okay. Item H1 is to amend regulation 20. Hold on one second. Do you have, real quick before I read it, Fred, do you have, do I have to make you the host or you're okay?
Yeah, can you make me the host? And then it says I can share the screen, so I believe I should be able to.
Okay. See if you can share it. I'm going to read it. Yes, it's working. Item H1 is to amend Regulation 201D to reflect the changes and retitling of small second unit ordinance to Richmond Municipal Code Section 15.04.610.020 titled Accessory Dwelling Unit and Junior Dwelling Units. There are no speakers on this item.
Good evening. I'm Fred Tran, the Deputy Director of the Rent Program. Tonight I'll be presenting item H1 of of the Rent Board to amend Regulation 201D to Municipal Code Section 15.04.610.020. In 2019, City Council revised the zoning ordinance to align with the existing state law. The small second unit ordinance was replaced with the Richmond Municipal Code Section 15.04.610.020 titled Accessory Dwelling Units and Junior Dwelling Units, known as ADU and JADU. Rent Program is requesting to revise the Rent Board Regulation 201D to update the small second unit ordinance to be consistent with the new ADU and JADU municipal code section. Program staff continues to communicate to the public that rental units will continue to qualify for an exemption if the primary residence is occupied by the property owner of the single family home with a permitted ADU. Fiscal impact, there is no fiscal impact related to this item. Background. The rent ordinance creates categories of exemptions to certain ADUs. One of these exemptions is for an ADU to comply with the small second unit ordinance where the property owner is a primary residence in the single family home. The small second unit ordinance created standards and procedures for an owner to be granted approval to build an accessory dwelling unit on their parcel. Over time, the small second unit ordinance became outdated and no longer reflected the changes in ADU requirements at the state level. City Council voted to replace the small second unit ordinance with the Richmond Municipal Code Section 15.04.610.020 titled Accessory Dwelling Units and Junior Dwelling Units to better align with the current state ADU law. After City Council approved the revisions to the small second unit ordinance, the rent program staff communicated that exemptions is valid under the new Richmond Municipal Code section. The discussion. The rent ordinance provides landlords the right to exempt their ADU when the rental unit is in full compliance with the Richmond's small second unit ordinance and the owner is the primary residence of the single family home. The exemption should remain if the small second unit ordinance is replaced with an ordinance that will better align or establish greater compliance with the state law. The change from the small second unit ordinance to the new Richmond Municipal Code section was necessary as state law required local jurisdictions to comply with California's updated ADU and JADU standards. The Richmond Municipal Code section 15.04.610.020 governs the same regulations as the small second unit ordinance. Exceptions that existed prior to the revision of the Richmond Municipal Code should continue to exist. Recommended action. Amend Regulation 201D to reflect the changes and retitling of the small second unit ordinance to Richmond Municipal Code section 15.04.610.020 entitled Accessory Dwelling Units and Junior Dwelling Units. This concludes my presentation and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions by staff? Mr. Vasilis.
Yeah, can you explain the compliance portion of this, that the owner would have to be in compliance?
Well, the compliance is typically similar to where when staff reviews or is checking to see if the ADU would qualify for being under the either rent control or just cause. There's typically 5 different scenarios. So with this particular one, it's where the owner lives in the primary residence and the permitted ADU is separate. Staff typically will actually have to check with either the owner or tenant. So the compliance portion is actually more, it's both proactive as well as reactive if we find out of the ADU. Say for instance, if we find out if the ADU is unpermitted, then they wouldn't be in compliance and it would not fall under it. It would actually they would lose the exemption. But in most scenarios where the ADU is permitted and the owner is living in the primary residence, they are in compliance and it basically grandfathers in.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else? All right, very good. Would anyone care to make a motion? Come on, folks, we're almost finished here.
I move that we accept the presentation from Deputy Director Fred Tran. Vice Deputy, sorry.
Can you read your motion, please?
I move that we accept the presentation.
Well, you can read on the recommended, Vice Chairman Sheck, is the recommended action that's on the.
Oh, I recommend, oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Brain's getting, it's too early, but okay. I recommend that we amend Regulation 201D to reflect the changes in retitling of small second unit ordinance to Richmond Municipal Code Section 15.04.610.020 titled Accessory Dwelling Units and Junior Dwelling Units Rent Program. Is that part of?
Okay, we'll leave it at junior dwelling units. Might I have a second, please?
Okay, I'll second.
Which one?
That was Board Member Johnson. I was just going to ask, is it junior accessory dwelling units? I thought it was
well, what the action reads is accessory dwelling units and junior dwelling units. Should we add one more word there, Mr. Tran?
It's titled, written that way.
Okay.
I would, yes, just add another word. It's put it accessory. That's what it should be.
Okay, where is that after junior accessory dwelling units?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so
we
amendment then?
All right, that is really a friendly amendment, the addition of that one word. Who brought that up? Or do we need to add it?
It was Board Member Connor, but Mr. Tran, is it a JADU? Is that?
It should be JDAU. So yeah, the accessory should be added.
It should be added junior accessory dwelling unit.
Correct.
So there was Board Member Connor with a friendly amendment to revise the motion to add the word accessory.
But you're adding it between junior and dwelling, or you're adding it between dwelling, junior, and units?
Between junior and dwelling.
Between junior, is that correct, Mr. Tran?
Correct.
Okay, yes. So there's been a motion and an acceptance, a motion and a friendly amendment. Will you accept the friendly amendment, Ms. Mishak?
Yes.
All right. And Ms. Connor, does that agree with you? You're fine with that, with your second?
Yes.
All right. In that case, may we have a vote?
Yes. Board Member Connor?
Yes.
Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Board Member Vassilis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Masek?
Yes.
And Chair Finley?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes to amend Regulation 201D. Passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is reports of officers.
There are no reports of officers this time around. I know you guys wanted me to have a long thing that I go into at this hour, but no report.
Well, I actually have no report.
Oh, good.
Michelle,
I just wanted to remind all board members that you should receive an email from City Clerk's office. They normally send it around this time to remind you to fill out your Form 700. So they usually send it around this time of the year. I just wanted to tell you to be on the lookout for it. So,
are all the board members aware of the Form 700? What it is? Okay.
Did you guys complete it? The new board members, have you guys ever completed a Form 700?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, just so we don't have to go into it right now. We'll send a reminder email and explain everything.
The city clerk's office basically handles the Form 700, and they will send you, it's about conflict of interest, I believe. And so basically they will send you an email letting you know it's like a link that you have to complete it on. And, you know, it's solely the city clerk's office. But I tend to remind everyone at the end of the year, because this is our last meeting before next year, you guys. This is our last meeting of the year. So I typically remind all the board members to be on the lookout. So that way you can, look for it in your emails. Sometimes emails get lost, and we don't want you to miss the deadline. I believe the deadline is April 1st, but still, you might not see it, or it might go to spam or anything, and I don't want it to mess up.
So the city clerk is Pamela Christian, right?
Yes, so you'll get an email probably from her, or it might be from Sabrina, somebody from city clerks, or it might just be from city clerk's department.
And I have a tendency to remind people to get it in by the deadline, because there is a fine if you don't.
It is, yes. Virginia, yeah, board member Chair Finley is really, really good at that. She will remind you up until next year. So I just want you guys to be on the lookout for it.
Well, on that note, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, but I'm also going to say happy holidays to everyone. Enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you next year. And this meeting is adjourned at 7:27 p.m.
Yes,
Thank you.
Holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Be safe. Enjoy and be safe.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.